Today let's talk about one of the toughest states in history. Of course, we're talking about Sparta. Today we'll be building some abs and setting off under the command of King Leonidas to battle the Persians and find out what the real feat of the 300 Spartans was. Unfortunately, real life differs greatly from what movies and games have shown, but that's why our channel is here, right? So, vote in the comments if you'd like to go to Sparta, and get ready. It's going to be quite brutal. Let's start with some historical background. The very name of the state, Sparta, isn't quite accurate and stuck thanks to the Romans. Look at any Spartan warrior's shield. You can clearly see the letter L, which in Greek sounds like lambda. The reason is simple. Spartans didn't call themselves Spartans. They referred to themselves as Lacedaemonians, in honor of the city of Lacedaemon, the stress of which is mistakenly placed on the last syllable, even by experienced historians. Later on, the city began to be called Sparta, which is where the modern name originated. The second misconception is positioning Sparta as a closed city. No, friends, Sparta was a state that existed for almost 1,000 years, from the 11th to the 1st century BCE. At that time, there were many states in Greece, and our Sparta was located in the southern part of the Peloponnesian Peninsula. By the way, the concept of laconic speech came from there because the people living in Sparta were not known for their talkativeness. Somewhere around there, our Spartan Vasia was born. Don't be surprised. The name Vasilis is Greek and quite noble, as it translates directly to king. It's around 480 BCE. Sparta is as strong as ever, spreading its influence across almost the entire Peloponnesian Peninsula. Nearby is the Athenian state, which Sparta doesn't like. But the main problem isn't Athens. To the east, there's the vast Achaemenid Empire, commonly known as the Persians. They don't really understand the Greek city-states, and they're driven by one simple goal: to conquer all Greek land. This is a serious problem because one look at the map is enough to understand how much more resources, people, and unity the Persians have. While Greece is divided into mini-states that only unite in the face of a threat, the Persians wage war as one front. To jump ahead, they lost. Why? Because the art of war is sacred to the Greeks, and for Spartans, it's practically life itself. Our Vasilis is a typical homoios, Spartan. In Sparta, full-fledged citizens were called Spartiates. There were also common laborers known as mothers and perioikoi, who were considered citizens only to a certain extent. But the harshest fate awaited the Helots. They were the poorest caste of Spartans, mostly peasants, who existed somewhere between serfs and slaves. However, Sparta's social structure was more complex than that of similar states. For example, the family of our Vasilis could have had dozens of Helots under their control, along with parcels of land. On paper, the Helots were serfs and were required to provide a fixed percentage of their harvest to Vasilis' family. What set Sparta apart from other states of the time was that the master couldn't increase this percentage. It was established by law. Vasilis was fortunate to be a citizen of Sparta, because for every citizen, there were immediately 10 Helots, who often incited revolts. They were punished extremely harshly. Once a year, Spartan rulers even declared war on their own Helots to eliminate the most rebellious and keep everyone in line. Yes, you read that correctly. Spartans effectively declared war on themselves. This was one of the most brutal states in history, and everything was geared toward one goal: war. Vasilis, like other boys, left his family at the age of 7 to go to the barracks. There, Spartan boys were grouped and trained in martial arts, sports, and even reading, which was unusual for that time. There was always an adult nearby, and children went about barefoot and wore the same clothes year-round. Food was a different story. All teenagers were fed a special broth called melanos, which was essentially pork boiled in blood, mixed with vinegar. Eating it was nearly impossible, and the children often went hungry. The state encouraged this because Sparta upheld a cult of simplicity and simultaneously a cult of strength. No one stopped teenagers from stealing. Punishment for theft was severe, but an uncaught thief was even praised for their skills. Now let's talk about myths. The most popular one claims that unwanted children were thrown off a mountain. This story comes from the philosopher Plutarch, who in the 1st century CE stated that children deemed suspicious by the council were thrown from a cliff called apotheosis. Allegedly, no one asked the parents, and it was compulsory. The problem is that Greek historians like to embellish reality. In reality, it was simpler. The practice of child killing was common not only in Sparta, but also in other parts of Greece and Rome. However, it was applied only to severely ill children to spare them from suffering. There was even a social class for moderately impaired citizens called hippomoi. These children weren't highly respected, but they weren't thrown from a mountain either. Besides, archaeologists have long studied all the gorges where children were supposedly thrown and found no remains there. Now, back to Vasilis. Children were allowed to wear clothes only from the age of 12, and until then, they ran around naked. They slept on straw pallets in the barracks, and on cold days, many placed nettles on their pallets. When they were burnt, they provided warmth and helped the boys survive. To pass the final test at the age of 17, Vasilis had to climb the Temple of Artemis, which was located high in the mountains. The test involved extreme flogging. The boy had to endure a series of whip strikes that only stopped after the first drop of blood. If a Spartan cried out in pain, the strikes continued even after drawing blood, intensifying in intensity. This was the graduation exam for a Spartan warrior, and our Vasilis proved to be a true warrior, passing the test perfectly. However, passing this exam only gave him the right to leave the closed barracks and appear in public. At the age of 17, Vasilis had just begun his military service to the state. To understand the hardship of Spartan military service, let's talk about their salary. As mentioned earlier, even good food was considered luxury in Sparta. So, when we talk about the Spartan diet, it's not an empty phrase. In a month, Vasilis received a standard ration, which included 3.5 buckets of barley, 2.5 kilograms of cheese, 1 kilogram of figs, and around 5 liters of wine. Compare this with the samurai from the previous video, and you get a bleak picture. In addition, Vasilis, like other Spartan warriors, received several metal bars, each weighing 625 grams. But that's a separate story. In an attempt to avoid luxury and inequality, the Spartan ruler Lycurgus came up with an interesting solution. Accumulating silver and gold was punishable by death, and the only form of money in Sparta was these iron bars. One bar weighed 625 grams, and to buy something valuable, you had to carry entire harnesses of these bars. The idea was to make any large transaction public. It was impossible to discreetly transport so much money, and if a transaction was public, people could become interested in it and find out where someone got so much money. When someone from another country arrived in Sparta, they often found it impossible to buy anything. Spartans looked at gold and silver coins with horror. This system completely eradicated corruption, robberies, and thefts. What was the point of taking a bribe when storing money required building an entire barn, attracting attention? So, in addition to a meager diet, Vasilis received several bars. With these, he could buy around 10 kilograms of meat and barely survive, while simultaneously training in a grueling daily regimen. After all, a Spartan warrior was worth 10 others, and this principle had to be maintained. In general, the film about the 300 Spartans did a decent job depicting the warriors' equipment. Our Vasilis, like any well-armed hoplite, carried a round shield, helmet, breastplate, and greaves. The film oddly chose to leave the torsos of the Spartans exposed, but in reality, this would be unsafe. However, there were also light Spartan infantrymen equipped with spears, bows, and javelins. These guys fought with any weapon since they had been trained in the use of all weapons from the age of 7. The organization of the Spartan army was unique, and some of its details are still successfully adopted by modern armies. A clear linear formation, strict discipline, and incredible physical strength made the Spartan army unbeatable. Forming up in 8 rows deep, the phalanx could stretch for up to 1 kilometer. Until 371 BCE, it was believed that defeating such a formation was physically impossible. The reason is simple. Unlike other armies, Spartans did not possess engineering structures. They simply advanced, relying on brute force, and in this aspect they surpassed and crushed any opponent. Returning to Vasilis, let's remember that it's the year 480 BCE and the war with the unwashed Persians is in full swing. Sparta is ruled by King Leonidas, who like everyone else is an excellent warrior. Everyone is familiar with the movie about the 300 Spartans, so we won't repeat the obvious things, but we'll focus on the differences between the film and reality. Let's assume that Vasilis is among the 300 Spartans, alongside King Leonidas, who indeed fought on the front lines with the warriors. Vasilis holds the defense against the Persian army at the Thermopylae Pass. This is logical because at the beginning of the video, we showed a map demonstrating the sizes of the two states. Under Thermopylae, by various estimates, there were up to 250,000 Persians, facing only 7,000 Greek warriors. It's worth noting that the number of Spartans is not random. 300 people make up the king's personal guard from the most elite warriors, and they truly held out against the enemy, which outnumbered them by 20 times for 2 long days. They would have held out longer if not for a local resident named Ephialtes, who decided to make some extra money. Ephialtes informed the Persians about a mountain path that could bypass the Greek positions. However, Spartan intelligence was not asleep, and Leonidas learned about this first. The king immediately sent all his troops home, leaving only 300 hoplite guards with him. But this wasn't romanticism, it was common sense. In Sparta, there was no greater sin than retreating from the battlefield without a clear order. Since Leonidas was the king, there was no one to wait for orders from. To avoid becoming an outcast, a name covered in shame, Leonidas chose to stay. Our Vasilis faced a similar fate. The film forgot one detail. Alongside the Spartans, other Greeks also voluntarily stayed behind. For instance, 700 inhabitants of Thespiae and 400 boys from Phocea. Moreover, the lots we mentioned earlier were also with the Spartans. The number of slaves is not specified, but it is officially confirmed that they were used as a kind of light infantry in campaigns. So, it wasn't just 300 people against Xerxes, there were around 1,800. But even this doesn't diminish the fact of their incredible feat. These few warriors defeated about 5,000 Persians, including the elite immortals of the Persian army. In total, over 3 days, around 4,000 Greeks died, while the Persians' losses exceeded this number by more than 5 times. In many ways, thanks to psychological factors, the Greeks would go on to win the war and conclude a very favorable peace. Don't be too sad about our Vasilis. As you could learn, his life was not the easiest, and for a Spartan, dying in battle meant the highest honor. For example, one of the 300 Spartans, Aristodemus, was sick during the battle. Leonidas sent him to the village to recover, and after the king and the guard were killed, Aristodemus returned to Sparta. There, he was given the nickname Aristodemus the Coward, and even his subsequent heroic deeds did not change his status in society. In 479 BCE, another Spartan, Pausanias, led the Greek army in the final battle against the Persians. It took place near the town of Plataea and ended in the total defeat of the Persians, despite their threefold numerical advantage. Aristodemus, a member of the original group of 300 Spartans, became a hero of the battle, but this didn't affect his reputation either. In conclusion, let's mention one more interesting fact. If Spartan boys were trained for war from childhood, Spartan girls were prepared for childbirth. Their lives were much simpler. Girls were taught reading, sports, and their health was carefully monitored. In a way, Sparta can be considered the precursor of feminism because even with weapons, Spartan women excelled. Just for a moment, all of this happened a couple of thousand years ago, and just 100 years ago, in some countries, women couldn't even vote. This clearly demonstrates that progress is a relative thing, but no matter how tough life was for the Spartans, they secured a permanent place in history. That's all for now, and if you enjoyed the transformation into a Spartan, don't forget to like and suggest your warriors for future episodes in the comments. Until we meet again.